Okay, Josh, we are live. I got the notification from X/Twitter before I saw in the app that we were live. So that's kind of crazy to know about. Theoretically,
Wow.
we're on YouTube and Facebook as well, although it
Well,
doesn't
well.
show us any viewer counts yet. So, we have 0 viewers, but somehow Doreen is representing Facebook. We've got comments coming in on Facebook. We've got the X notifications. I'm assuming we're good. Oh, we got a YouTube viewer now too. Okay, so we are good. We got people on it. We are
hmm
ready to
We're rocking.
roll.
We're cooking.
So I'll start off
hmm
and just mention that our next Q&A, in case you're watching this one and wondering when the next live one is Monday, June 16th. So you can find that on the website. We'll be plugging it in on social media. It'll be in the Bayma Messenger, all the usual places where you can find those things. But as you can see, we have Josh Bosse with us this time. So we get to pick up some of those questions we've been setting aside for Josh. We've got, we've got some good ones coming up. Lots of stuff that could potentially take us in all sorts of different directions. So I don't want to hold you up any farther. If people want to submit questions, you're
Yeah.
welcome to drop those in the chat. I will set those aside and we'll see what we can get to for there. But we got a couple hours, so we're going to do as much as we can. So,
And I can answer
oh,
one. I can answer
yeah,
one question right off the bat. Me by a landslide. I mean, Marty's a good cook,
I
but
assume this is
I like
Doreen's
chili.
question on who would win a chili cook-off.
Yes, sorry, I should have said yes. Who would win in a chili off, Marty or Josh? Of course, I have to say myself. I'm very confident in my ability to cook, and my wife is very particular about chili. She does not like your average chili. So
Okay.
I marinate skirt steak and I cook that up and I like cut it into bite-sized pieces.
All right.
It's really okay. Anyway, that's the only fun question we're doing on top. I got to get into
Well,
this.
Kathy
We have a
says she's
lot of
coming from Akron,
questions.
Ohio. So maybe we'll
Oh,
do like an in-person chili cook-off between you and Marty.
oh man, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. Do a
All right.
little Ohio meetup.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the people who have sent in these wonderful questions. Some of them from a long time ago, which I guess if you tune into these, you know how that goes. But I always love getting these questions, especially as I'm preparing for one of these, because we like kind of compile them all and uh, kind of divvy them out according to like who we think would be the best person to answer it. And it's always fun to see these and have time to kind of chew on them as I get ready to prepare. So, and there are a lot of good ones. All we already have, and I just want to dive into it because we have a lot of really good ones that could get us deep into the weeds in a good way. But I'm going to start here with a question from Alex. It goes like this. I noticed that in Matthew 3 through 4, there are a lot of mentions of and references to stones or situations involving stones. I'm trying to find the meaning of stones and what they may represent. My thoughts so far are that they are used in building, making altars, and to stone people. Which, yeah, that's true. They are used in those things. I'm having trouble finding the theme that connects all of these or makes sense in all of Matthew's mentions. I also thought it could be something to do with them being lifeless, almost like an idol that can't bring anything useful to a person, which I think I know which Matthew reference you're talking about there. About the, you ask your father for a loaf of bread, does he give you a stone? We're gonna dig in here. I think there's a little more to it than that. You also note here at the end of your question that maybe when John says that God could raise children of Abraham out of these stones, is this maybe a situation where he was being threatened with being stoned and thus people were holding up a lot of stones? That could be. I've never thought about that, but it certainly could be. Although my recollection of that scenario is that he's chastising, the I don't know if it was the Pharisees or Sadducees or maybe both, but the people are usually on John the Baptist's side. He was very popular, so it would be maybe the Pharisees and Sadducees are threatening them themselves, but that seems a little, I don't know. We'll dig into this here. So let me go. I have a couple tabs here open. So what I really love about this question is right away you take things in a good direction of saying, hey, I noticed this word coming up a lot in a bunch of different kinds of situations. What could that mean? Why is the author doing this? And that is a great way to approach the text, a great starting question. And one thing I want to point out is, if we're looking at what these stones symbolize or what they represent or refer to, there is kind of a pre-question to that we need to jump into, which is that, when we're talking about stones here, what word are we saying? We have an English word stone. Of course, this is being translated to English from Greek, but also as Hebrew authors and, more importantly, Hebrew thinkers, or Aramaic, which is very similar language. What word are we talking about there? Because there are actually different words usually used for some of these different things you talk about. Like the word for stoning is usually sakal, and the most common word for stone is even. Now, even is more connected to what you said in your question about building. We could also say establishing. That is the word for to build is bana, and aven, vana, they share a root. So there is a strong connection there between stone and building. But if we look at Matthew specifically, and I was doing this earlier, and I have to say I had a little bit of a hard time finding a reference to stone in Matthew 3. I'm going to look at it again here just to make sure I'm not missing something. But yeah, I don't see anything in Matthew 3 that makes me think of a stone. Maybe there's something I'm missing. We have the baptism scene. Oh, wait, never mind. Of course, that's the reference we talked about earlier with John the Baptist criticizing the Pharisees and Sadducees. Why did I miss that? Oh, I know why. Pro tip, when you're using Blue Letter Bible, if you type in the word stone, but in the text, the reference is plural, as in stones, it will not come up. So, pro tip is if you just type in stone, and then in all caps, or, and then the plural stones, they will both come up. And that's how you avoid having to backpedal when you're on a live broadcast. So we first have this example in Matthew of John talking about bringing life out of stones. And you know what? I am going to guess. This is a little bit of a shot in the dark because I hadn't seen this earlier. He's talking about producing fruit consistent with repentance. When the Pharisees and Sadducees shows up, John is immediately hostile to them. And we can understand this because, he probably doesn't think they're being very genuine. That they're not really listening to his message. So why are you here? Who are you listening to that brought you here today? Because it sure is not because you're listening to me. That's kind of the vibe I get off of that. And then he refers to Isaiah, or before that there's a reference to Isaiah. I'm wondering if this is another reference to Isaiah, because this reminds me of Isaiah 50, where it talks about the look to the rock you were hewn from. I believe. Is it 50 or 51? I think it would be 51. Let's look here. Yes, Isaiah 51:1. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were cut and the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father and to Sarah, who gave birth to you in pain. When he was one, I called him, then I blessed him and multiplied him. And the rabbis actually say that this image of the rock that you were carved out of, that this, they say it's also an analogy for the infertility, the invirility of Abraham and Sarah before they had those names. And so on a deeper level, I think there is maybe a connection there to what you're saying about the deadness of stones. But what springs up to me and what I suspect is the theme here is that the stone here represents actual good actions. Like if we remember what Abraham's unique role is, he's the person that God wanted to partner with, specifically because God saw him. We can see this on two levels. One, he marries Sarai, as Marty talks about in the podcast. Takes care of someone who he knows he cannot profit with, to put it in very crude historical terms. But this is what we would say. This is self-sacrificial love. This is some Jesus type of stuff, and God sees that and says, "That's what I want to partner with." And so I feel like that fits very well with the theme of repentance. Additionally, if we're thinking of Torah as the ultimate ground of references, that is something that is going to not always be where we find the reference, but that if there is a solid reference in Torah, that's at least going to be there in the back of their heads if they're quoting this stuff. Now, when we think about stones and repentance in Torah, we would one thing that you would definitely want to add to your list of things that it reminded you of is the Ten Commandments. These things carved on stones, and so therefore, John pointing out the stones, is he saying that the people who are like the stone that they were carved from, God can rebuild Israel and the mission of God that worked through Avraham. And there are many times where, as we talked about in the podcast, Israel becomes the anti-story. Israel isn't just failing; they're doing the opposite of what God wants, and God has to send them into exile or in some way antagonize them. And it's not until they repent that things are then copacetic in terms of you are now really kind of released to go do this mission again. So I think that's probably what John is reminding them of, if I had to just take a guess. But then if we look in Matthew 4, that's where we really start to see the stone references pile up fast. This is when Jesus is being tempted. What's the first thing the tempter, Hasatan, says to him? Turn these stones into bread. And then after this, he brings him to another place and says, jump down, it's said, and what he quotes is, your foot will not strike a single stone, angels will be sent concerning you, you won't strike your foot against a stone. And so we have right off the bat there, boom, boom, two big references to stones. And one other thing I want to mention here, if we're going to talk about stones and Torah, is that, like I said before, there are different words for stone. They can mean different things. I'm not going to get into all of that. But one big thing we have to think of is Yaakov. So if you do a search of the word stone or stones, you're going to see there's one reference in Genesis 2. Then we see it again in Genesis 11, talking about when they make bricks, that they use bricks as stone. Again, the theme of building. And then after that, it's all Jacob. Genesis 28, multiple times. Genesis 29, multiple times. 31, 35, 49, all through the end of Genesis. I'm pretty sure every single reference to stones is about Yaakov, is about Jacob. In fact, the last one being part of a blessing, or kind of almost a eulogy, and almost like a self-eulogy, because it's at the end of Yaakov, or I'm sorry, it's a blessing for Yosef by Yaakov. But at the end, it mentions the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, who is, or from, what is it? From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. And again, stone being an image of foundation, and Israel being literally the new name of Yaakov, and shepherding being something that this is translated as if this is referring to God, because it says the mighty one of Jacob. But I think it should be read from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, in talking about this blessing on Joseph. And from Jacob is this shepherding and stone of Israel. He's the foundation for this nation that God is partnering with. But anyway, Jacob and stones are all over the place. And I'm going to debate myself here. Do we want to dig more into this? This is just such a great question. I think, I'll finish up talking through the first two references here, not jumping into the one later about, God doesn't give a stone instead of bread. And I'll do that also because here we have an image connecting stone and bread. But, these are some ideas and tools for you to all play with. I don't want to, give too many answers that might discourage people from digging on their own. But I know Marty talks about these verses already. I fully co-sign those teachings and what's going on there. I want to add some other things here. So talking about kind of the more thematic and image side of it. So if we remember what I said earlier about stones and the Ten Commandments, the symbol of God's partnership with Israel, again, Israel, Jacob, same person, the namesake of the people group that God marries at Sinai, and the ketubah of that marriage, the tangible symbol of that being the Ten Commandments. If Hasatan comes and says, turn stones into bread, doesn't that assume that stones aren't already bread? Put another way, it's almost as if Satan is tempting him, and here I'm going to get a little bit mystical. We maybe don't have to go quite this far, but on some level, maybe this temptation is saying, Torah is really heavy and hard for people like a stone. Why don't you make it easier for people, more nourishing, more easily digestible? And I think this also matches in Matthew, the heavy focus on parables. Why do you teach in parables? And I think that what Jesus calls out here when he says, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes out of the mouth of God, which takes the same image and flips it, that the way that Hasatan talks about it, stones are not as good as bread, even though on some level, the way that Jesus lives Torah, we know is bread, as we talked about in the episode on the John 6, the test of bread and the test of meat, those two episodes, that in living out Torah, or in our context now, in living in the Spirit, in bringing kingdom, there is life, there is nourishment from that. And by flipping this, that bread isn't sufficient for us. We can't just live on bread alone, but we need to live on every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Jesus is saying, I don't need to turn stones into bread. The stones, this partnership with God, living Torah, living kingdom, that is more crucial to sustenance than bread. That and to put that in practical terms, if this is maybe a temptation, and when I think about Satan tempting Jesus, I like to think about it and like, what would something like I remember growing up in church and like in Sunday school, hearing that like, oh, Satan thought he was going to trick Jesus, and I really don't think that works with the story here, because if you're trying to trick Jesus, like, why is your last attempt the least like subtle and nuanced? Like at the very end, Satan's just like, why don't you just worship me instead of God? Like what kind of temptation is that? Is that really so tempting to Jesus? Is Satan just really bad at tempting? Because if that's the case, then like, what is this story even about? Like, this should be tense for Jesus. So I feel like Jesus, seeing the way not just the Sadducees, but especially, well, I guess both the Pharisees and Sadducees, but maybe more personally concerned about the way the Pharisees, the sect that Jesus most closely identifies with in terms of his actual message, that the way that they make Torah more burdensome, like that is something I think that demonstrably bothers Jesus. And that's a fine line between acknowledging that and acknowledging that the way is my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Like that is true, but not at the expense of saying that Torah, that God's word, the way God has shown up and taught us how to live, that is burdensome. It shouldn't be burdensome, but not because there's anything wrong with it, but because when we understand it, especially through more of now that we have a Jesus lens, it's even more obvious that it is there to bring us life. And then when we go to the second temptation here, where he says, it tells him that he stood on the pinnacle of the temple, which I've got a theory about this, but I'll come back to it in a second. The temptation here is that the angels, that you should throw yourself down because angels will lift him up so he doesn't strike his foot against a stone. And this, I think, too, is a kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, my image as a kid was like, he was standing on top of the church building, which I think I imagined at that point that the temple had a steeple or something that had a very high point, and Jesus was like thinking of doing some extreme stunt or something like this, and that he could just jump down like in a video game and wouldn't get hurt. That angels would jump in and cushion his fall. But I think too that this is teasing out another tension of Jesus, except this time, instead of it being between like his, I don't want to get heretical here. I don't know how to say this in a way that is theologically correct. But when we say Jesus is fully God and fully man, I'm just going to speak kind of like we do with God goggles, like that the one half and the other half. Not that they're actually two halves or a split personality. I'm not saying anything like that. But the first one kind of teases apart the tension that Jesus, as a human being who understands that struggle, wants to lighten the load of his fellow human beings. I think this is Jesus's tension between himself and that divinity that is also him. And the reason I think that is because if we were going to say what the pinnacle of the temple is, Western brain, we would think, yes, pinnacle means the highest point, therefore the highest spot on the temple, somewhere in the roof. But I would counter and say perhaps the highest point in the temple is the place where God dwells, right? What is higher than God? And that would mean that he brings Jesus onto the Holy of Holies, onto the ark, onto the mercy seat, or the cover, the Kippur. And if that's the case, then once again, leap down, throw yourself down, and you won't fight. Pardon me. You won't strike your foot against a stone. This could literally be talking about the Ten Commandments, because what is inside of the ark but the broken tablets? And again, I think we could see this as maybe the tension of like, why don't you just announce yourself as God? Just do things in a way that makes sense to you as a human being, right? I'm sure there's part of Jesus that, like when he says, take this cup from me, like there is a human level at which it's like, man, can't we just do this in a straightforward way? Tell people all this clearly. Like, do we have to do it in this way that is so difficult? And I wonder if he's saying like, yeah, hey, do it, whatever seems right to you. Like, you can't mess up. You won't be able to, your foot won't strike the stone. You won't violate the Torah. I don't know. That's like I said, more of a mystical way of reading it, but that could be more involved in some of the thought process there. But one other thing I would say about that, you know what? It could also be a reference to the altar, which also sits on top of stones, because the altar is also called the Holy of Holies.
So, Josh, you mentioned earlier that we can't live by bread alone.
Yes.
But I think, based on the activity in the chat, people want to know if you can live by chili alone.
Can I live by chili alone? No. I like too many different kinds of food.
Marty has briefly entered the chat. I don't know if he's gone by now. He's got a meet and greet, but he takes issue with your challenge. So I think we're realistically looking at a chili cook-off. I don't know.
Oh man. Man, oh man. Oh, well, Marty. We'll just see. I mean, there's only one way to find the answer here. Taste and see.
Taste and see
that the Lord is good.
All right. I love it.
Yes. Oh, and thank you too for popping in here, Brent, because that was, I think, the perfect point to move on from the very first question.
Okay.
These questions are too good. Let's see. Do you have anything for me, or should I move on?
You got it.
All right.
We have somebody on the Bayma Facebook who's saying, I've got a mad chili recipe. I know that's not me. I assume it's not Marty, but apparently somebody else on the Bayma team is ready to participate. So,
Ooh. Maybe it's Brian.
I don't think it's Brian. He's on his own YouTube. He would probably participate. He'll make me some pulled pork.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yep, go for it.
I hope you enjoyed it. Okay. On to another much shorter question this time.
We'll see about that.
No, Brett, don't do this to my confidence. Okay. The next question, pardon me. The next question is coming in from Chad, who asked this question over a year ago. Thanks for holding on, Chad. This is a question about a fun little, one of those kind of little alley stories. It's like, it kind of feels like an offshoot from the main road, but it's very interesting. The story of the man of God, the unnamed man of God in 1 Kings 13. Chad says he was deceived by an older prophet and then killed by the Lord. And this is, again, 1 Kings 13. So, man, I've got so many Blue Letter Bible tabs pulled up. All right, here we go. So, for those who don't know this story, there is a mysterious man of God, just called a man of God, who is sent from Judah up into the northern kingdom of Israel. So this is after the split. And as we've talked about, I feel like I've talked about this on the podcast a number of times, but in the split due to Judah, the kingdom of Judah, literally enslaving the northern kingdom, or the 10 tribes, not Judah and Benjamin, and of course Levites, using them as coerced labor, as some level slave labor for the building projects of Solomon, notably his palace, the temple, as well as other projects. I think there was like a big like stone steps, like some big like intersection, basically. Anywho, so because of that, God calls on Jeroboam to lead a revolt and to separate. And one of the tensions for Jeroboam right off the bat is that, guess what? Jerusalem is in Judah's territory and Benjamin's territory. They share a border. I think Jerusalem might have been on the border or somewhere. Maybe it's in Benjamin. Anyway, doesn't matter. Point is, it was in the southern kingdom in Judah's territory. And so if they were going to, celebrate Passover, celebrate, Shavuot and Sukkot, I think those were the 3 Ascension festivals. Maybe Yom Kippur. Feels like Yom Kippur should be one of them. Anyway, not just for yearly festivals, but if you wanted to make a sacrifice, you'd have to go into the territory of your oppressor that you have now, politically torn away from. That's kind of a sticky situation to be in when you're constantly having to, they can just cut off your access. That gives them power over you. What are they gonna use that to, oppress you again? Like that. Genuinely a very difficult problem. I don't know how I would have handled that if I was Jeroboam. We do know that what Jeroboam does is not good. He creates 2 altars, 2 literal golden calves at 2 points in the northern kingdom for people to go and do all their normal temple stuff at those places. And this is ultimately, way down the line, this is where Samaritans come from. Through that split, that's ultimately where, even though, a lot of times the 10 tribes are called the lost tribes because they were carried off by Assyria. There were, people left, but they intermarried a lot. And so because of that, this is why Samaritans are hated even more. So this is the root of that here. And God, this man of God, is sent to cry out against these alternative altars. And the Jeroboam's there. He reaches out his hand to tell his guards to seize the man, but as soon as he reaches out his arm, it withers instantly. I'm sure that there is. I've tried to think before if there's anything here that this is remiss to, but anywho, he is miraculously wounded by God. The king has to ask the man of God to pray for his healing, which he does. And then the king, Jeroboam, says to the man of God, hey, let me offer you hospitality. Come to my house. And the man of God says, literally, no, I cannot do that. I cannot stay to even eat a meal. Full out rejects not just the hospitality of Jeroboam, but of I cannot share a meal. I cannot this is, remember, in a communal culture, this is a much bigger statement. This is saying it is forbidden for me from sharing a meal here. I need to leave. And we learn that this is something that was commanded to him by the word of the Lord. An angel or God's presence came and told him to do this. And what's this? Okay. This is just a pin I'm going to throw on this little asterisk. What's interesting here is it's God's command is, you shall not eat bread nor drink water nor return by the way that you came. I've never noticed that detail before. That reminds me of a little bit of the Magi. when they visit? Do they leave by a different route? Anyway, I feel like I've heard that before. Foreman game. Where have we heard that before? I don't know. I'm not going to dig into it. I said this was going to be a short question. We're going to make it that way. So back to chat's question. Do I have any commentary or thoughts? So what happens after this? Didn't get to that story. Jumping ahead of myself. An old prophet, we're told, was living in Bethel, and his sons came out. They had borne witness to what had gone on at the altars, and this older prophet gets on a donkey, catches up with a man of God, and then he says, "Come home with me and eat bread." And this man of God reiterates his command. I can't do that. God commanded me not to. And this older prophet tells him, "Hey, I'm a prophet, and an angel told me to take you to my house so that you can eat and drink." Lying to him. Yikes. Why is he doing this? I'm not going to get into that. That would be a lot of speculation. It's a good question. Why does he do this? I don't know. Now, this prophet, this man of God, this man of God relents, goes with him, and as they were sitting at the table, let me make sure I'm reading this right. Okay, yes, I am reading this right. I guess my brain had never fully captured this element. This is really funky. As they were sitting at the table, the word of the Lord came to the prophet, this older prophet who brought him back, and he cries out, telling him, "Because you have disobeyed the command of the Lord and have not kept the commandment that the Lord your God commanded you, but have returned, eaten bread, and drunk water in the place in which he said not to do those things," skipping over it, "your dead body will not come to the grave of your fathers." And then, man, that's so crummy to have this guy lie to you. You go back to his house, and then he's the one who prophesies that you're gonna die. Man, that's the rest of the meal has got to be awkward. I'll say that much. This, I will say, this really smells like a reference to something. And I really, I don't know, but the details especially are so tantalizing. We have an unnamed man of God, which is an interesting distinction. Does it call him a prophet? It doesn't look like he does. So is there a reason why he's not called a prophet? And then the prophet is called an older prophet or an old prophet. So is this, these seem like they could be references to something. Yeah, man, that is really, really interesting. There does seem to also be the image of him sitting under an oak, which is where the man of God is. That feels like Abraham, of course. But this is reversed. Abraham is not offering hospitality. Abraham is being offered hospitality, and instead of accepting or offering that hospitality, he is rejecting it, refusing it. This is weird. There is an interesting midrash about Avraham and his father, because we are told in the Torah explicitly that Terach originally set out from their home country to go to Canaan, but he does not go to Canaan. He stops halfway, and then God calls Avraham to continue to go to Canaan, which brings up a lot of questions I'm not even going to touch on. But maybe this is an Abraham figure who is being enticed to stay where God has called him to leave. Who knows? I don't know. But yeah, that's my thoughts and commentary on that. Let's see. Next question we have is from Kyle. And Kyle is going through the podcast for the first time. Last June, you were in session 3. So who knows? Maybe you're still in session 3. Maybe you're through with the whole dang thing. But your question is this: you've been wrestling with the Western versus Eastern approach to worship, and you talk about the uh, tendency we have for the lyrics of our worship songs to use the first person singular. I worship um, God and me versus we will worship and us. And you ask, is the Eastern approach to worship is in the community of one another, correct? Any tips or suggestions as I wrestle through this concept of worship? I would broadly say, yeah. I think I have not uh, personally, experientially had a lot of experience in non-Western worship contexts. I've definitely been to my fair share of synagogues, and there you can feel a real cultural difference there that is appreciable, and it is definitely leans more toward the communal. One thing, actually, this isn't an Eastern context, but it is experientially a more Eastern, slightly more Eastern. It's still Western in a lot of ways, but slightly more Eastern, and that is the practice of the Quakers. I really love the way Quakers worship. And if you've never been to a Quaker service, it'll look slightly different because part of the Quaker structure is that each community is kind of self-governing. So this will inevitably vary between Quaker communities. So the few experiences I've had, though, and from what I've read online, this is pretty basic, kind of. And there's a similar structure to probably what most of the people watching here have experienced. If you've ever been to, like, just I grew up in a lot of non-denominational churches, so that's my baseline. So I don't want to. This isn't true for you, whatever. But usually church is you have worship, you have sermon, you have worship again. Sometimes people plug in communion at some point, passing the offering bucket around, all sorts of different things that people do. And obviously in high church traditions, this is very different. And I'll touch on that in a second. So what Quakers do is that you kind of have that same structure, except those are not 3 steps that you go through. Those are kind of 3 chunks of time. So they'll have, like, the churches I went to, the Quaker churches I've attended, they have 3 like 30-minute segments. And the substance of those 30 minutes was silence, just silence together. And then at some point, when the band felt ready to start worship, they would get up, they would play their songs, we could sing along, we could stay seated, however the Spirit was moving you that morning. And then they would get off. And then somewhere in the next 30 minutes, the pastor would get up, give a sermon, same thing. So there was the same structure, but there was room between all those parts that was just left alone, fallow ground, very Sabbath kind of approach. And what was also great is that during those chunks of silence, and I've seen churches do this in other contexts, but during that silence, people were free to pray out loud, to sing, to read the text, to speak, whatever it was, read a poem. Mostly, though, it was prayers and lifting other people up and quoting text. And I really like that. And that, I feel, is more Eastern in the sense that it allows there to be, like, the actual programming, what happens in what order in this sacred space of church is able to be affected by the community. Like a whole sermon can sound very different just by someone standing up and saying something before or after, or reciting text just before songs are played. These things can really shape the service, and it's shared by everyone equally. There's not like, it's because it's part of the culture there. There usually isn't someone like dominating the space. Anyway, so uh, in terms of like literally more Eastern, like Jewish congregations that I've worshipped with, one of the things that I really love is that the whole like talking to each other, like a lot of times in church, at the beginning, there's the call to like, hey, everyone get up and say hi to someone else. Just try and make friends a little bit, please. And in most of the, especially in the, I'm sure this doesn't work as well in Orthodox circles. I haven't spent really any time there. But in a lot of the Reformed Jewish synagogues I've attended, people like having like a whisper conversation while the rabbi is talking. It's like not seen as a faux pas. Like that's people are doing that all the time. People are, connecting. Like there is the sense of the, the community being present is the main thing we're doing while we're going through these ritual steps, and even the way that like going up and reading Aliyah, and you'll have people who will jump into different roles, and sometimes that's planned out beforehand, but sometimes they'll just say, hey, we need someone to read this next chunk. Brad was going to be here, but his daughter got the flu, so he stayed home, so I need someone else to come up and read this verse. And there's just a lot of like very direct communal involvement. But specifically talking about how do you approach this, assuming that you are in a more Western worship context, like what do we actually do with the church you're in? Not trying to convince anyone to leave their church and go become a Quaker or anything, but hey, maybe never bad to try it out. One thing that I am someone who, when I'm listening to music, lyrics are kind of the main thing that hit me. And so a lot of times when I was in churches where there wasn't maybe as much alignment in terms of how we viewed the text or theology, basically there wasn't as much overlap there. I kind of made worship time into a practice of basically like trying to sing along with the music, but changing the lyrics to be trying to express the same sentiment, but from an honest place. So, whether that was, certain words or language that might, kind of create an image based on a different, the penal substitutionary atonement, which I personally don't ascribe to. So, like, it might be a verse like that, or a lyric in a song like that. Where I'm like, oh, I don't think that's the way God actually, I don't think that's the right attitude. Maybe tweak a word as I'm singing, and I think that could absolutely work with taking those songs and thinking about how, the same sentiment, like the difference between I will worship and we will worship, is just that pronoun. That's pretty easy, I think, personally, in my head as I'm singing it, think us instead of me. And not only that, I think maybe if you need another handle for that, like a kind of a step, a rung on the ladder to get there, another handhold, for me at least, is that I think in a very real way, because we live in such an individualistic culture, there are certain aspects of our own theology that we really don't understand or know how to embody. And specifically what I'm talking about here is the theology of the body of Christ. If we really are the embodied presence of Christ, not as me being Christ on earth, like we can think of it in that way. We're trying, Christian, little Christ. We are trying to be like Christ as a person. But the reality of that is that I'm a part of the body. I can't do everything. Another way of saying it is I can't save everyone. And so theologically speaking, my sense of self, if my identity is Christ, and Christ is more than just a rabbi in the Holy Land a couple thousand years ago, If Jesus is more than that and is something that was there at the dawn of creation, is the very word of God, the way that God expresses himself to us, the way that God incarnates, becomes real to us. That's not just, Jesus showing up for 33 years. That's also every time God is made real to us. And now that we've been invited to all partner with God in a new way, regardless of our birth, regardless of a lot of things, we are invited to partner with that and have our identity be Christ. And if all of that is the body of Christ, both who Christ has been throughout history, both in the historical person of Christ and Jesus as the cosmic word, used from everything from creation to Torah itself, then in the same way, like the body of Christ is also part of that identity. And so maybe burrowing deeper into what do we really mean when we say I will worship? Is I just me? Or because I'm a follower of Christ and I've died to myself, then the idea of self, even if we can, this is something that I know in like Buddhist circles, there's a lot of use of paradox and contradictions to try and get at things that our brain can't fully wrap itself around. And I think that that's also, shares a lot of DNA with, parables and images that the text uses. And I feel like, in their sense, in the Buddhist sense of like insisting that self isn't real, I think we have a slightly different way of saying something similar, which is that the self, which is a concept we kind of can't live life without bumping into, because at the end of the day, I'm finite. I'm just me. I do only have my eyes and my ears. Even if I have trust or the capacity to be empathetic and connect with other people outside my own experience, there is still a limitation. And I think that the biblical idea, the Pauline idea of seeing yourself as, like, in the modern sense with science, we'd say, we are all part of the DNA of Jesus. We are all born out of that DNA. We are all different members. We all have different tasks. Paul talked about feet versus hands versus eyes. Now we can think about, are you a cell? Are you part of the bone? Are you a part of the heart? Are you a part of the lung? Do you produce enzymes? Do you expel waste? Do you take in food? Like, the body has totally opposite functions depending on which part of the body you're in. And it's so diverse and different. And can we turn our sense of self-identity from being I in the worldly sense of embracing that finiteness and saying, yep, I'm just going to only care about what happens to me and what I want, and not just changing who we care about, but also changing our sense of identity to not just be, oh, I identify with Team Jesus, and therefore, like, God looks at me and he sees Jesus, and I'm with Jesus and Jesus is with me. I wouldn't say that's inaccurate, but there is a deeper truth that also includes all of the people God put us here with. And especially because at the end of the day, we don't know. We can't judge people's soul. We don't know who is in and out of the body. And I think letting ourselves, accepting that limitation and being willing to look on the broader we, including people that we disagree with, people who might have an opposite function of us in the body. If we can work to build that, make that more true in ourselves, so that when we say I, there's really no difference between I and we, because my identity in Christ also means that my sense of self also extends to my fellow members of the body. I think there's something there. This is where I think a lot of times spiritual practices are a good way to not try and just go against the grain and swim upstream and do everything the hardest possible way to push it back against the world, but also to or instead of that, to not try and change. Like, this is what Marty talks about. Like, we're not here to try and tell you, like, hey, become more Eastern. It's more that using an Eastern lens, we can see where maybe we don't go far enough, or where we have misunderstandings and can challenge ourselves, break up the stones in our own heart and in our own ears, so we can go beyond. Because ultimately, God doesn't care about this distinction between Eastern and Western. Like, those are totally arbitrary. I mean, like the what we would call the Far East is also west of us. Like, there is at some point kind of like this is a category we've created, like a lot of our theology, and it's helpful when it's helpful, but when it's not helpful, we don't need to lose sleep over it. All right. I see here a live question from Taiwan on Facebook. This might be a silly question, but my first intro to chiasms has been through Bema. Is reading Hebrew a prerequisite, and what resources would you recommend to learn more about chiasms? This is a great question. So first of all, Hebrew is not a prerequisite, not at all. It would certainly help, because a lot of times chiasms work on the level of repeated words, and Hebrew has a much smaller vocabulary pool, because one word can have more variance in meaning, and similar phrases like prepositions, all these things, they can be interpreted in more nuanced ways. So sometimes, if you're just an English reader, you're going to miss a chiasm, you're going to miss a link like that, because you aren't seeing it in Hebrew. If you saw it in Hebrew, it'd be plain as day that these two things line up. This is especially true for things like wordplay, where words that in Hebrew sound almost identical or have very similar spellings. Like, there are going to be a lot of elements of chiasms that are missed because of that. But that is not disqualifying. So one really good resource for this is Blue Letter Bible. So if you are on Blue Letter Bible, every single verse has I don't know if there's a setting you have to change to get it to look like this, but there's going to be a setting or a button by each verse. It says Tools. And if you click on that, you can use it to show you an interlinear, which will bring up every Hebrew word and the English word or phrase it is being translated into for that verse. So in English, if you see words that are repeated or words that seem similar, you can go and click on that word and say, oh, hey, it says, heaven's here and heaven's down here. And I also see a couple other words that seem to be repeated. You can check and see, like, hey, are those the same word? Is there, maybe even another doubling of that word? Like, you can use that to kind of help give you a sense of which words overlap. It's still a little difficult. It does give like pronunciation guides and stuff. And so, like, if you really want to do some research, you can figure out, like, oh, is there a rhyme here? But that would be pretty work intensive. The other interesting thing with that is that they do have like a pronunciation guide. Like, if you click on a Hebrew word, you can have them read it out, but it's not at all like the Google one. Here, if you like look up a word on Google, you can just have the weird little computer mouth like show you how it's pronounced and mouth it for you. Theirs has a guy like read out the whole Strong's number right before it. It's a little bit more, a little bit clunkier. I'm guessing it would take a lot of time to do that, but you could hack that together with Blue Letter. Blue Letter is not a perfect tool, but it is going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of free resources that will help you get a little bit of that Hebrew. The other thing I would say with this, though, is that there are a lot of chiasms that are very obvious in English. And like the chiasms in Genesis 1, whether you're looking at some of the words that are repeated that are very obvious in English because it's a phrase that's repeated exactly X amount of times, or even if you're just looking at like, oh, hey, day 1 and day 3 talk about light, day 2 and day 5, or I'm sorry, day 1 and day 4 talk about light, day 2 and day 5 talk about the waters above, the waters below, and day 3 and day 6 talk about the land. Like, that's something that can be observed by paying attention to images. So that's the other thing I would point out, is that chiasms and images, like, those are the things you want to see connected more than anything else. So if you ever happen to see like strange details being added, like what we were talking about earlier, where the text goes out of its way to tell us that the prophet is older, it's like, okay, the text didn't have to tell us he was older. That must be an important detail, because the Bible is not it's not written like a novel or a newspaper. Like in a lot of Western writing, we do things like, we put in settings. So we'll describe, the way the afternoon felt. We'll try and put you there as an individual, right? As if you were this character, this is what you would be seeing and hearing and sensing. That is not the way the text approaches it. It's not trying to tell you, we don't know what color Abraham's beard was or whether his eyes twinkled or anything like that. We know what we're supposed to know. There's not a lot of extra detail. So if you have detail, it's there for a reason. There are not going to be any throwaway verses, especially ones that are just adding like that kind of scenic flavor. So if you see something like that, or if you see an image that feels really purposeful, like, okay, this doesn't just seem like he got up and he went to this place. It's like he got up and he went and he saw this place from this place. Even if it doesn't end up being a chiasm, those details are there for a reason. Because of how chiasms are constructed, it is those details, repeated words, repeated themes. So when you see that, that is always a good clue to a chiasm. In terms of specific resources for chiasms, let's see here. I've finally got a bookshelf. Oh yeah, Brent, I was hoping you would jump on something.
Yeah, I put a couple links in the chat for 2 FAQ videos that Marty did. It's not exclusively stuff about chiasms, but there's one on Bible study tools, and then there's one on like translations and other resources. So both of those could potentially be helpful. I don't know how far Tawana is into the podcast, but we definitely throw a couple of tools out there along the way as they become relevant with what we're talking about. So if you're early on in your BEMA journey, I would just say keep going, and we will throw stuff your way along the way. But yeah, I don't know what you're cooking up over there, Josh. Looks like you're getting into a bookshelf.
Yeah, I don't have the exact book I was looking for, but this one is also going to be helpful. This is The Art of Biblical Poetry by Robert Alter.
Of course, Alter.
Of course, Alter. He has another one just like this, just like this, called The Art of Biblical Narrative. That one is going to be really helpful because he distinguishes between like chiastic structure, that kind of mirror structure. He doesn't go into the nuts and bolts of it, but he will talk about how that is working on a structural level for narratives. This does the same thing, but for poetry, which is also really important because one of the only consistent things about Hebrew poetry is the use of parallelisms, which functionally is what a chiasm is. It's just a whole story chunk that's built like a parallelism. And so because of that, both of those books are going to be very good. This one, I will say, from having read The Art of Biblical Narrative and reading this is a lot more heady and complex because there aren't a lot of there's a lot of work to do on recognizing biblical poetry. Like there isn't always a clear sense in the text of when something is intended to be poetic and in verse, and that brings up a lot of questions of what's a chiasm, what's not, what's and something he talks about a lot in Art of Biblical Narrative is the question of, is something like what we would call later in the podcast a remez? Is there an intentional reference to another story, or are we looking at a type of story? Like one example he brings up that I remember from the Art of Biblical Narrative is the betrothal scene at a well. Like that happens all the time. And we even have that scene referenced by Jesus and the woman at the well, but that's not like a remez to a specific story or anything like that. It's just a type of scene. It's like their version of the meet cute. Where do you meet the girl that you're going to marry? At the well. That's just an image,
It's the best gathering place, really.
Yes, and there's the well is an image of fertility and things like that. So there's reasoning behind that, but it's helpful just in hearing someone who is coming at this from a scholarly perspective, like just hearing how they perceive differences in the text, where they see patterns differently from us. It's just going to help build up, even just like neurologically, how you react to seeing stories in the text, what things you start paying attention to. So I would say in general, finding kind of like somewhat scholarly sources, semi-scholarly sources that talk about biblical structure. You're going to get stuff on chiasms. If you buy a book called, the top 10 coolest chiasms, you might get something more funky. You want to pick something a little more on the boring side so that, it's not, they're not oversimplifying it. You want to get a little bit of grit in there. That's my personal opinion.
I feel inspired to publish a book called The Top 10 Coolest Chiasms. We should do
it. There we go, man. Here we go.
All right. Well, we're a little past the top of the hour, but we'll pause at this moment. We did get a comment from Kathleen saying it's great to hear you, Josh. So, the people are enjoying what you have to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are just stopping to thank the people who support the work that we do. Josh deals more directly with students than I do. But like this work of campus ministry, this work of mentoring, this work of trying to develop our intimacy with God, whether that's through studying the text and learning what God has been doing in the world and how we might be a part of it, how we might partner in that work, all sorts of things. Like our work spans the gamut, but we couldn't do any of it without the support of the people who make this work possible. So we want to say thank you for that. Tim made a comment, said thank you for an amazing meet and greet in North Spokane last Friday. I was there. I saw Tim for the second time. I had the pleasure of meeting Tim a year before as well and got to meet tons of people. Marty is still on tour right now. So let's see. He's actually, I'm checking the schedule here. Let me throw it up. He is in Donald, Washington at Hoptown Pizza right now. His meet and greet started 9 minutes ago. So hopefully people who are there now are not doing that. But we got a prayer journey in Centralia, Washington coming up in a couple of days. Here's my giant mouse. Yeah, look at that. Giant mouse. And then Marty is preaching at Venture Church Mill Creek campus in the Seattle area this weekend. So those are your last couple of chances to see Marty on the Wild Wild West tour. But then other stuff coming up as well. So another Q&A next month. Marty's got a couple of traveling things going on. But Southern Texas in July, famously great time to go to Texas. But yeah, the news page on the website has all of those details on where we're going to be and when. I am possibly going to Dallas area in August. So once I get that nailed down, that'll be on the website. And of course, you can sign up for the Bama Messenger and Get all that stuff dumped into your inbox once a month. Doreen loves the giant mouse, but I do too. The giant mouse is the best. Yeah. So that's it, Josh. Thank you to everyone. Not that's it for the live stream, but that's it for our pause in the middle here.
Of course.
Thank you to everyone who supports us. We are thrilled to do this work and dig into the text together. So without further ado, let's get back into the questions.
So I'm going to kick us off at near the top of the hour with a double header question from Carol, who sent us a question last August and also sent us a question just a few months ago back in January. And this first one's going to be really easy to answer. This is from Carol, if I didn't say that. Can anyone clarify for me whether the general public were allowed to go into the outer court of the Mishkan, or did they have to pass their sacrifice to the priest at the door/entrance? So the simple answer is yes. They were allowed to come into the court, and that's because essentially this, I think, will get a little more complicated if your question was about the temple, because they had multiple courts, and to be honest, I'm not an expert on all those distinctions. And of course, there were also multiple temples. But with the Mishkan, where there's just the tabernacle, the actual tabernacle building that's inside of a larger courtyard, and in that larger courtyard, right in front of the tabernacle, you have the bronze altar. This is where sacrifices were brought. Everything inside the court is the holy place, or is considered a holy place. There is the holy place, which is in the tabernacle itself. Only the priest could go inside the tabernacle, but everyone else was welcome to be in the courtyard. In fact, you had to eat if you were bringing a sacrifice where you would eat a portion, you had to eat it in the temple courtyard. That's my understanding. Now, this is also a very halakha type of question, which for those of you who are maybe earlier in the podcast, actually, I don't know how much we talked about halakha. So halakha is the Hebrew word for the walk or walking. And it's the question of how do we practically walk out Torah commandments. So that is where, if you are looking at Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, if you look into any rabbinic writings, a lot of them, if they're getting like crazy detailed and talking about, the really fine points of Torah, that is halakha. They're saying exactly when does it become Torah, exactly what is work, and when should we stop doing it. Those sorts of questions, like who's allowed where, is that true for all people? No, you can be ritually unclean. There are other laws that talk about who is and isn't allowed to come into the courtyard at different points. So there's a lot there, but broadly speaking, to your question about the general public, yes, they could come into that outer courtyard. They needed to if they were going to eat the food. So as I understand it, yes. Short answer, yes. Man, I really made that longer than I had to. I guess I could have just said yes, but then, we would have missed some cool extra context. So Carol's other question is a very, very, very long question that I'm not going to read in its entirety. But this is about a episode of mine, 286, regarding Micah, the character in Judges, who I implied is the son of Samson and Delilah, potentially. This story of Micah, if you'll remember, it's if I'm remembering correctly, this is in the John 6 episode that I mentioned earlier. Man, a lot of connections in these questions. In that John 6 episode, there are some early references to the people who are there looking for Jesus to speak, and Micah, this character who we learn is trying to commission a idol of 4 God, like not another God, not a foreign God, but for Adonai. And there's this whole hullabaloo between him and his mom and who the money belongs to and a curse that's said. And the outcome of this is that Micah kind of constructs his own little mini worship site for God. He has this altar that he pours a lot of money into. He also meets a Levite by chance, and this Levite becomes like his house priest. And then sadly, he gets strong-armed by a bunch of Danites who are roaming around, and they take all his stuff, and he can't do anything about it. And in the episode, I don't want to overcharacterize it. You can listen to the episode 286, if I remember right. The pair of episodes are called the Test of Bread and the Test of Meat, and I believe it would be the first one, which I think is the Test of Bread. Yeah, it would have to be. Anywho, so if you want to listen to that episode, go there. Carol's question is about like the emotional connection between Micah and the worship of Adonai, given that culturally speaking, his father is Samson. Samson, famously dies, but also is, running around doing a lot of crazy stuff. Like he may not have been a huge figure in Micah's life. We don't really know about that relationship at all. And clearly at this point in the story, he is left with his mother, and his mother, Delilah, was not an Israelite. And so her question is about, this, coming from, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the same as, someone who has a, mixed background in today's context, because, there is a lot closer of a context, be like talking about maybe something a little bit closer to, growing up in Canada and then moving to the U.S. I don't know, probably not as big as of a culture difference in some ways, but that, there seems to be this psychological need that Micah has to like own and connect with God, and to, he's making these really big displays. Oh, Brent, did you have something to add here?
No, I did not. I hit the wrong keyboard shortcut. I apologize.
Well, it's nice to see you. No, it's great.
Yeah. Hey. Happy to be here. While I'm here, I guess I will say that 286 is the Test of Bread. So there you go.
Bingo. There we go. Thank you very much, Brent. So anyway, to get back to Carol's question, she is connecting this with someone she was in a close relationship with, who also had, heritage from multiple cultures, and is asking about asking about, what was Micah thinking and doing in context of how she's seen this work out in her own life. And I think I would connect this question to the larger issue of, I guess in one sense, kind of the problem of exile, the problem of having a strong, like a cultural connection. What we might also talk about today as part of like the question of identity. And with that cultural identity, which again, in a more Eastern communal centered culture, like that is much more important than it might be to us today, thinking, well, I'm my own person. I'm going to choose how I walk this path. I'm not beholden to, what my parents and grandparents and great grandparents have done. And especially with patrilinealism, the patriarchal system of things going father to son to son to son. What was Micah's emotional relationship with wanting to associate himself with Adonai, even if it fell outside of what the Torah actually prescribes? And I think this question too, like it ties in both the finitude, the imperfection of when we want to recapture, or maybe not recapture, maybe just capture for the first time a feeling of real belonging with God, with the culture we actually identify or identify with, and when that is something that is not reflected in the reality around us, whether that's like, you're living in a country that has a different majority culture than yours, if you're a minority in that way, or in any way really. And also, I think it's kind of paralleled in the tension we have of having a spiritual tradition that did not come from our literal, genetic ancestors, so to speak. Like, you know, very clearly in the New Testament, there's a lot of drama about us Gentiles be brought in, which, my parents are both Gentiles. Their parents were Gentiles. Maybe there were some Jews in there in the background. I know at least on my mom's side, there was a lot of immigration in times where you definitely did not want to identify as a Jewish person. So, all that to say, we are connected to a tradition. The whole reason why we are doing Bema is because we are, as Paul says, we are the grafted in branch. And man, it's hard for this wild branch to learn new tricks, but we want to connect to the living experience that was behind and in and through suffuses the text. So I think in those more abstract senses, we can all relate to that desire to have a genuine connection with something that is maybe not already existing in our present reality. I mean, you can even just say that's true of us wanting to have a deep spiritual connection when we also have to live lives that make a lot of practical demands on us. We all wish, maybe on some level at least, that we can, just do the Israel in the desert thing. Just God bring us food, make sure our clothes don't wear out, don't have any concerns, just get to wander the desert, learn about Torah, learn about God, become God's partner. Like, man, wouldn't that be cool? But part of the work of building kingdom is bringing it out of that space and into the land, into the promised land where everything's fruitful, and productivity now gives us a new, more complicated relationship. Anyway, I'm veering a little bit off track there, but some of Carol's questions here are about, what did Micah feel about this or that? And to be honest, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. I know that I can definitely sympathize with Micah wanting to, especially in him, like paying so much money to make this idol, like wanting to have something in his house that showed people, anyone who entered in there, like, I worship God. I worship Adonai. That's who I'm about. Look at this obscenely expensive statue or shrine to God. And, then having a Levite, like all these things, like it definitely feels like he was chasing that. And I personally, I don't feel like the text explicitly condemns him. I feel like he's kind of a tragic figure that in trying to create a connection with this that was in his house, but wasn't something, to kind of go back to what we were talking about before, didn't necessarily connect into the community. It's a little bit like easy come, easy go. It ends up leaving him because it wasn't rooted in anything other than his household and his personal wealth, his own personal blessing. And I don't think that necessarily tells us how to feel about our identity, how that intersects with the fact that, we, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we all feel when we're like listening to Bema, and I was like, man, I wish I could have that more Eastern approach and think in this different way. And sometimes our desire to do that means we do goofy things like, oh yeah, what if I, did this big demonstrative grand act to put on display my own feelings. And that's not inherently bad. But I think the story of Micah does show us that, and I think this is probably reflective of maybe some of the the tension at home, maybe the absence of Samson, that because he has that uneasy relationship, he overcompensates a little bit. And anywho, I bring all this up just to say that that is the way that our emotions and our heart gets mixed into that. Like, it is important for us to put these things on display, to want to identify with God. And I think with Micah, we see what happens when we don't. Honestly, I think it's what happens when we don't question some of our own cultural assumptions and bring those in. Like, well, obviously, this is an okay way to do it. And I'm not saying that necessarily Micah did something wrong or sinful or anything like that, but I mean, obviously, it wasn't how God asked us to worship him. I think what it does tell us, rather than trying to make this a moral judgment, I would say it definitely, I think, tells us how we can, with good intentions, I don't want to say shortchange ourselves, but we can miss the deeper meaning behind the signs and the symbols and the rituals. And if we are longing for that cultural connection that maybe isn't there, my personal suggestion, my personal path, how I navigate that is, I hold the things that God's given me, right? We have what this looked like in the past. We have the text itself. We have tradition. We are also blessed to live at a time where we can reach out and understand other cultures, other ways of thinking that can season that, give that perspective, give it more substance, make it less trapped in its own bubble. And I do think that holding those things, not trying to let any one of those things individually be like, this is the absolute be all end all of how I'm going to walk out my faith. Personally, I feel like, we are living in a time where we are blessed with the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. And I think that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us when we hold the things God puts in front of us. Maybe for a lot of the people listening, that's the Bema podcast. But it should also be other things. Like, I hope your spirituality doesn't look like just Bema and what Bema puts on display. I hope that the things that Bema gives you that might inspire you or challenge you in a healthy way, like hold those things, but let them be mixed in with everything that God is also doing around you, your own context. None of us here on our side of the screen know more about your context than you. We can't feel that for you. And I think it's important to look at that critically and honestly just to look at it deeply. Am I just like Micah, trying to use this Levite, kind of find a new daddy figure in this Levite, find a father figure who's going to help affirm an identity that's really already true? I don't think Micah had to work so hard. I think he was compensating for a deeper emotional disconnect. Now that's also, talking about someone who lived millennia ago. So what good is my quasi-therapy speak from this far in the future? Doesn't do Micah any good. But I think for us today, it's important to look a little more deeply at those things and to remember that intentions don't make our worship or our connection, our cultural association with God inherently correct. And I think that's a big stumbling block for the Western Church. Which obviously, if you're listening to the Bema podcast, we project our culture on the text. I bet all of you kind of knew that on some level if you've been listening to the podcast. Okay, moving on. This question is from Mary from last August. At that point, Mary was in session 3, episode 126. And since the show has moved along quite a bit and I'm newer, I was wondering if Marty and Brent have more of an explanation now about Jesus' answer to the Sadducees about the resurrection and the marriage of the woman with 7 supposed husbands. Thank you. very welcome. Obviously, that was aimed at Marty and Brent, but on their behalf, thank you. Brent, if you do take issue with me saying thank you on your behalf, you can pop it again and correct me.
I take no issue, and I don't have an answer, so I'm glad you do. I didn't see this question until it was assigned to you, and I put it in the document. I was like, well, I hadn't thought about it since then.
Yes, and oh my goodness, I cannot spell Sadducees. This is one of the questions I did not pull up that tab, unfortunately. Good night. It's 1C, double D's, double E's. So
I would say you could just copy and paste Sadducees, but sometimes you think you're doing copy and paste, and then you accidentally put yourself on the live stream. So,
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so this is let's see. Is this okay, I'm going off the one in Luke here. So if you're not familiar with this story, the Sadducees are trying to, I wouldn't even say trap Jesus, because at this point, I guess they're coming at Jesus for sure, but this feels like to me that they're bringing a question that is more toward the Pharisee worldview in general, specifically on this issue of resurrection. So the Sadducees do not believe in resurrection. That is one of the, I'm not going to go on at length about that. Marty has great episodes on the Sadducees. He's always going to be more historically grounded than I am. So the Sadducees are also, for those who maybe aren't fully on session 3 yet, or if it's just been a while, the Sadducees are the kind of institutional power in first century Judaism. They are the priests, essentially, and they are also politically compromised. They work closely with Herod and the Romans, partially so that they can keep the temple system open and running. That's something that Rome allowed the Jews, and so there's they are politically compromised, and in that sense, it is understood, most people at that time, that the priests were incredibly corrupt. Marty talks about them as being like the mafia of that time. They were entrenched power. They had big theological differences with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were more kind of at that time, I don't know historically how true this is, but I would characterize it as more like the more grassroots, radical version of Judaism at that point, and not radical in the sense of like how the Zealots were, where they were trying to create like a political revolution, and not radical in the way that the Essenes were, and trying to like kind of create their own little conclave, or their own, what am I trying to say? Their little compound out in the desert. But they were radical in the sense that it was kind of a newer approach, and was not as entrenched in power, but they were the ones who emerged victorious ultimately. Like modern Judaism comes from Pharisaical Judaism, and that's I personally think definitely a good thing and part of. Anyway, gosh, I'm getting off track. So the Sadducees are coming for him. They give him this like hypothetical situation. Feels very much like a modern like debate on Reddit or something. So they pose this hypothetical situation where they're talking about this process in Torah called levirate marriage. In the Hebrew, the term is yibum. If you look it up in English, levirate marriage. And what this law is that if your brother is married and dies while childless, there was a kind of cultural understanding at that point that your brother is now cut off, there's no genealogical record of him now. Like he doesn't have someone to carry on his name, so to speak, but also literally. So, in order to allow your brother to have a lineage that goes on, they had a practice where you would impregnate his wife and that she would bear a child, and that child would be considered your deceased brother's. And then you would have fulfilled your obligation. He technically has an heir, and that allows things to keep moving. Now, obviously, there's a lot of issues we might take with this. So that's where I want to clear up, like, some of the weirdness are the Sadducees like kind of using that as a gotcha for saying, well, how can resurrection happen if this happens? Let's say there's a guy and his brother dies. He's married but childless. So that brother, through levirate marriage, marries his wife. But then, let's say there's 7 brothers, and each one of them that situation happens with. And so this one wife gets married 7 times. If they're now all resurrected, who the heck is she married to? Right? Like, doesn't that kind of have the vibe of like a gotcha of, like, oh yeah, like if I don't know, like, well, what's before the Big Bang, or like something, some kind of philosophical debate gotcha. That's kind of what this feels like. It doesn't feel like it is necessarily aimed at Jesus in particular. And I feel like on one level, this is probably included to give us a sense of Jesus's interactions with the Sadducees, because he does not actually talk to the Sadducees all that much. And I think it's because of what I said earlier. He doesn't really align with them theologically at all, not just on this issue, but on a lot of other issues, not just the eschatology, but also how they're leading. He does not appreciate their leadership. If we think about the different ways Jesus interacts with people, he's much harsher to Pharisees. He's much softer when he's talking to normal people who are kind of ostracized for being sinners or some other reason. And then with the Sadducees, he's flipping over their tables. Like, those are very different modes, and I think it tells us about how, kind of signals to us where Jesus falls relationally with these different groups. And to me, this is kind of just a setup for Jesus to dunk on them, but also more specifically to kind of show that he doesn't really regard their perspective. Like, he seems to give more face to even like the Zealots. Of course, he pushes back against the Zealots. He pushes back against all of them. But there's elements where we can point out and say, oh, he's actually not as anti-Herodian as the Pharisees might want him to be, or as anti-zealot as the Herodians and Sadducees would want him to be. Like, he's a little too radical for these people. He's not radical enough for these people. Like, he kind of sits in a bit of a cultural no man's land. And I think this characterizes that relationship, this is my personal opinion, as just kind of dismissive of them. Like, okay, yeah, they're bringing up kind of these just hypothetical, abstract questions, not very relevant for normal people or how to live out the Torah. So this is their gotcha. They say, who is he married to? Jesus says, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot even die anymore, for they are like angels and are sons of God, being participants in the resurrection. But as for the fact that the dead are raised, even Moses revealed this in the bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov. Now he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. And then some of the scribes, these are going to be not Sadducees. These are other experts of Torah. These are people who, presumably, if they're scribes, they are, I don't know, would they have been people writing out the Torah? I'm not as good at some of these. Marty probably has these answers in the podcast somewhere. And they tell him, Teacher, you have spoken well, but they did not have the courage to question him any longer about anything. So they just tell him, okay, yep, that's a good answer. He kind of just stuns them. So again, we kind of just see him dismiss their thing. Like, I don't think, what you're proposing about what the world to come, Olam Haba, that age, as Jesus says, the sons of this age are like this, those who are worthy to attain that age and the resurrection neither marry nor are given in marriage. So just kind of uproots the whole premise and just says, yeah, there's no marriage over there. End of story. And then flips it around on them and says, actually, if there is no resurrection and God is identified with our patriarchs, these men who are dead, if they're dead, how can we say that? Because God is not a God of the dead, but of the living, which I don't know. That might be, I'm guessing that's some a fiery thing that feels very, when we look at Greek mythology and even Egyptian mythology, like gods of the dead are very big and important, which is, I feel like, kind of true, broadly speaking, because burial practices are one of the primary identifiers of culture. Is what do we do about these dead remains? How do we honor them, dispose of them? It's kind of a practical and spiritual problem all at once, and it tells you a lot about the character of a society or a culture and what story they're trying to tell. And so that's where my guess would be this is some shot back at them, maybe for being cozy with Rome. I don't know a ton about all the distinctions between like Greek and Roman mythology, but I would guess that I wonder, maybe this is a reference to Hades is the Greek name, Pluto. Pluto is the Roman name for Hades, the god of the underworld, god of the dead. And he is also the god of wealth, if I'm not mistaken, because he's a chthonic god, a god of the underground spaces, which is where, that's where you find gold, that's where you find jewels. And that's also where we get the word plutocracy, rule by the wealthy. Don't know why that word sprung to my head, probably no reason. Pluto being the root there, and that's where we get the connection, or that's a example of the connection between the god of the dead and the god of wealth. And they definitely were very compromised in terms of their alliance with wealth and power. So maybe Jesus is making a shot at that. That is just pure speculation, though. Although I would guess that within, Jesus is not just arguing to disprove their point, because he already did that kind of immediately and dismissively. It's this comeback where Jesus is really, he puts fear into them. No one wants to respond to him. You say, "Oh, good answer. I'll go home now. You've satisfied my curiosity, sir. Goodbye." They do not want any of this heat. Yeah, there's a lot of good questions here. I'm not going to say that I have any other insights on this. Anywho, let's move on. There are a lot of other questions here. I'm going to hit a couple of them kind of quick and then jump in. Man, I don't know how Brent feels about this. I do not mind going a little bit late. So there's a really juicy question at the end. We'll see. All right. I want to first jump to a question from Jack that we received earlier this January. And he is asking about very early in the podcast, episode 10, Walking the Blood Path, Circumcision. And he is curious about the purpose of circumcision, if it is a way of actually, here, I'll just read it. I was curious if a possible purpose of circumcision being such a defining and culturally odd practice was to take something like nakedness and redefine God's promise to them. Yeah, basically taking the shame of being naked that we see in Genesis 3 and instead kind of subverting that image. And I would say really quickly that I have a couple of thoughts on the imagery behind circumcision. I wouldn't disagree that there's a connection there with nakedness, but I think there's some more nuance there. So one thing I want to throw out, you mentioned that it is culturally odd, and the strange thing is that circumcision is actually not very culturally odd. Circumcision shows up in so many different cultures. It is crazy. So like if you just like look at the Wikipedia page, it is used in a variety of cultures for a variety of reasons. Some of them it's a cultic thing, like Marty talks about, with it being used in Egypt for setting aside the priestly class. It can be a sexual cleanliness thing. It can be a like manhood ritual thing, like a coming of age thing. It also, and this is, I think, this is personally what I think the circumcision thing is all about. And if you hear me out, I think it'll start to make sense. So when you would capture people and subjugate them, you would want to, these people were essentially slaves. They were not your people. They were conquered. You could kill them all, or you could force them to just do what you wanted them to do. And now that's a little bit difficult, especially, unlike slavery here in America, where there was a very obvious physical distinction in skin color that identified you as a slave. In this area of the world, people are enslaving each other. Not as easy to necessarily tell the difference, especially if you're taking all the cool stuff they have, which would probably include their clothes. Clothes are a bigger deal back then. So one of the things that they would do, sometimes either just to humiliate people or to symbolize that they had been conquered, was they would castrate them, and also cut, like again, going back to what we talked about with levirate marriage, cut them off from having spiritual successors, cutting off. You don't have a future, is what that says. Now, castration is a very dangerous thing. There's a lot of, big blood vessels and arteries and stuff. Very dangerous. If you do it wrong, you've just killed a perfectly good slave. Of course, this would be the perspective of whoever is going around conquering people and taking them as slaves. So what they would do instead is they would circumcise this person, because it's symbolically saying the same thing, but it is a much less physically dangerous method. There's not as much of a chance of dying if you just circumcise them instead of fully castrate them. So as a kind of symbolic castration, but more importantly, a symbol of you have been conquered. You are a slave. You are nobody. You don't have power. I think God's saying, hey, Avraham, especially because we were talking earlier about chiasms. I believe it's on either side of, I forget what story is exactly at the middle. But we have on one side, Avraham is renamed, and on the other side, we have Sarah being renamed. And on one side, we have Avraham's genitalia being, in a sense, given this mark of lowering, right? Like this was used for in those times by some cultures. And on the other hand, we have Sarah and her genitals being healed, being given a higher place. She is now able to take this, like what would have been in their culture, like a mark of dignity for her in a certain sense. So I would say that, image-wise, it makes a lot more sense to me that instead of God saying to Abraham, like, oh, you're going to be a priest now, that kind of makes sense. But to me, God telling him, hey, you're the patriarch, you're the person in power. What's going to tell people that you're mine is if you take the mark of a slave. If you take the mark of someone who has been conquered, who is less than, voluntarily identify with that symbol and know that that's what makes you mine. I think that is very powerful. So I would say I prefer that as the imagery behind circumcision. Now, again, I can't prove that. Again, circumcision is used in a ton of different ways all across the world. I don't know if there is a way to have a concrete answer because of all that potential difference and it changing over time and in different cultures and, all sorts of stuff. But when I look at all those images, that's the one that feels the most Jesus-y to me. That's the one I like. That's the one I go with. So connecting that with the idea also of nakedness, to me, like that just flows really well because they're both marks of shame. Okay, let's see. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to skip that question. Ooh, okay, shoot. Oh, I really want to get to this gym question. Maybe I should have started with this. Okay, I'm going to come to that in a second because there's an even bigger question. So, Jim, if you're watching this, I want to answer your question, but I'm going to start with a question from Renee. My daughters and I love have you opened up our minds and hearts to so much truth. Having been spiritually abused for so long, we feel lost. Churches seem to be a scary place, and we don't live near a community. It's lonely, and my daughters are angry at God for showing them truth that only leads to feelings of abandonment and sadness. They are not the type to turn away from God, but they are very, very hurt. How can I guide them? I feel as they do, only I'm not angry at God for keeping me in the dark. Or for not keeping me in the dark. I see. They are young adults, 30 and 24. This is their journey, I know, but I pray that I can help and not hurt when they come to me with all their pain. This is a very real question, and your kids aren't exactly college age, which I work with college students in the Baymont audience. Just a quick plug to say if you are out there and you're a dang college student and you're in the Baymont audience, which I'm going to assume you are if you're watching this, send me an email, midrashjosh, MIDRASH, Josh, spelled just like my name, Josh, at gmail.com. I would like to connect with you because this is a very real question. And to be honest, I don't think there is a specific answer. Big surprise. But I think that this is an unfortunately altogether too common situation where you learn all this stuff on Bema, on Bible Project, in your own study, whatever. You listen to Foreman, and you have a community where you can't bring this stuff. You can't bring these new ideas. And this tension is created that really, really sucks. It creates a lot of pain and suffering. And not for any bad reason. You're not starting to sin. You're not walking away from your faith. You're trying to pursue God more deeply, and it's just not happening in your church community, or you can't even find a church community that actually feels like a church community, like a spiritual community. And I think the answer to this depends on where you're at. There are some people I know who, and this was me for a while, where there was a while once I really dove into this stuff where I could not, I just couldn't go to church. I needed to just have time with God. And then there came a point where I realized, like, okay, yeah, I really need some community, even if it's people I disagree with, even if it's people that are looking at me sideways that might be a little more hesitant to want to talk with me or want to let me, lead a group or a Bible study or something. And that really is hurtful. But there was a point in time in which I felt like, you know what? No, I can hold this. I can hold this for you. I can overlook those things for the sake of our community and, not take it personal. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with worship songs. Like, yeah, there's going to be some worship songs that you play and maybe they're really powerful for you. But for me, they say a bunch of things that I don't think would come out of God's mouth. And instead of using that to drive a wedge in that community, I was able to just look past it, find a way to redeem those lyrics, tweak them to say what I felt was true, what I believed was true, was a truer true, maybe we can say. Sometimes you can just cover that gap yourself. Sometimes you can like hang on to both sides of that contradiction and stretch with it. There are also times where you can't. And I don't think we should begrudge ourselves or other people the right to feel that. And I wouldn't even say the right to feel that. I think that is absolutely the wrong way to characterize it, but it's often how we characterize it. I have the right to ask these questions. I have the right to do this. Yes, of course you do. You should have a genuine living relationship with God. That means you shouldn't have to fake that you want to be at the wedding, right? Like you should want to be at the wedding. You should want to be there. You should want to be partnering with God in this way and with these people. And if you can't say that honestly, you should figure that out and not just white knuckle it and push through. If that means you need to take a break from church for a little while, that's okay. Like if you look in Torah, there are a ton of cases where God tells people, hey, go be alone for a while. Don't do any communal stuff. You just got married. You just have a kid. Something big and crazy happens like that. You are exempt from all communal expectations. And having that chunk of time to just be like that, God is obviously willing to compensate for that. It's in the dang Torah, folks. It's in the text. So I think it is not just a right. I think it is something we should look at as not an obligation, but something that should be expected to need to happen in a healthy relationship with God. So in one sense, those feelings are real. And I never had a struggle of feeling angry at God for revealing those things. I think, again, part of this comes back to which part of the body are you? I'm a part of the body that loves to learn and be challenged. And that requires me to hold on to those kind of intellectual contradictions, those emotionally challenging tensions, and just the way I'm built, that's not the thing that weighs down on me. I would imagine that if I was a different part of the body, I would have a very different response to that. And so, it's okay for them to be angry at God, right? Like, again, God talks all the time about us being his children. I am now a dad. I can say this with authority. Sometimes my baby is angry for very good reasons, and I can't help him. And sometimes that means he hits me, and I don't think less of him for that. I don't get angry at him. I understand that he's teething. I understand that he's hungry, and we're in the car, and no, you can't have mom's breast right now. She's driving. It would also be illegal for me to take you out of your car seat. You can't understand this. You're a baby. It's okay for you to be mad. And in our context, especially because we don't know where things are going, we don't know how our story is going to end. We don't know how our story is going to continue on after we pass away. God knows all these things. God's aware of what's going to happen. I think God can handle his children, who he knows better than any of us do. It's okay for them to be mad at him, especially when there's a real thing behind this. This isn't like, oh, God didn't give me the Ferrari I wanted. This is, I'm trying to follow God, and it's separating me from my spiritual community. That isn't right. That's true. That isn't right. That shouldn't be how it works. This is, to me, this is the problem of Job, right? Job is, to me, I think Job is a parable for exile, and specifically the exile as an experience of a righteous person, right? Like if a bunch of people get shipped off in exile, you have all the people who maybe need to go to exile, but then there's a couple people who are still righteous. There were a couple people who didn't mess up, who didn't cave in, who kept the faith, who did everything right. Like we talk about, Judges was a crazy time, but also Boaz was there in the middle of it, doing Torah like it was his dang job. Like, there are always going to be Boazes. There are always going to be Jobs. And Job is like the Boaz that just happened to be living at a time when exile was starting. And now he's in exile, And he's saying, what the heck? I didn't deserve this. I'm receiving punishment, but not because of something I did. In fact, in the middle of the book, he has this great there's this very strange chapter that just kind of breaks away to praise wisdom, Lady Wisdom, this archetypal spiritual figure. Maybe we can think of it as the Holy Spirit. I don't know. Some people do. And his question is, why am I being punished even though I didn't do anything wrong? And right after talking about Lady Wisdom and all this, kind of cosmic beauty of God's wisdom, he then says, well, before this exile happened, I had a community. I was able to help people live righteously. We were, to put it in our terms, we were doing kingdom. God, we were doing kingdom in my little community, in the place where you planted me. We were doing kingdom. Why is it now this? Why am I now in exile? It's not even just that like things fell apart. It's like my life is ruined. And we were doing everything right. I went above and beyond. What's wrong? And Job is vindicated at the end of the book. Job is fully vindicated. God shows up and says, Job is right. You, his friends, are wrong. You need to offer a sacrifice. He is going to facilitate it so that you can be forgiven. Like, God fully backs up Job. And so I would say just off rip, you are free to support them in whatever way they need to be supported in this. I would say that when they bring you that pain, don't be in a rush to try and change it from pain to something else, which I know is very hard as a parent. I think that at the same time, we are also given the spiritual capacity to transform pain and suffering, to redeem that into something that is more than just softens the pain, but can actually become transformed into something that spiritually elevates us, that draws us even closer to God. I know that was certainly what happened for me. To be a little bit vulnerable, there was a period of 1 year after I had but before I met Marty, I had kind of stumbled into all this Jewish context stuff, but I lost community with the people who had initially introduced me to all this, and it was a very bad ending. So I had a lot of scars and uncertainty coming out of that. And then when I went back to my old community, I had this experience. I didn't fit in anymore. It felt like just total separation from everyone. And all I really had left, I'm like, man, okay, I can go here to try and figure this out. Well, there were Jewish teachers. And this is where I first, experienced the tension between Christianity and Judaism. And there was a period of a year where I'm like, I want to follow Jesus because I see that in the text. I don't want to follow Jesus because I know that's still supposed to be the right answer. So, and I would say this to God every day. I would beg God, just make it clear to me that Jesus is the guy, that Jesus is the way, that all these rabbis I'm now looking at to try and help me wrap my head around all this crazy stuff that my church is never going to talk about or look at or give any credence to. And it was a whole year of not being sure and wanting to make sure that I was making that decision correctly, not just making the correct decision, but making it in the right way, in a way that honored my relationship with God first, without being afraid of my relationship with people. And God brought me out of the other side. And I now have a much stronger faith in Jesus because of that. Like God, I literally had a moment where God revealed a weird teaching to me. I don't know if I would call it sowed, but it was kind of close to that. But it isn't something I would ever teach because it was something just for me and just for that question. And it made it so I not only wasn't weighed down by that, I was fully convinced of the divinity of Christ, and that I was my following of God was following the path of Jesus. And it also deepened it. It took me way farther than just, is Jesus the guy or not? Yes, no. It went way beyond that binary, because the way, when God teaches it to you, like again, going back to those 2 episodes, test of bread and test of meat. In the test of meat part, where God, or where Jesus, who is God, of course, the people are in essence complaining to Jesus. They're like, we really want to follow. We really want to follow you. Our intentions are good. We want to follow you 100%, Jesus. You are the guy. We'll make you our king. You won't just be our rabbi. You'll be our king. We'll do everything for you. And Jesus tells them, you're missing the point. And they respond to him. They quote from a psalm that talks about the importance of passing on teachings from one generation to the next. And they say, teach us clearly so we can pass this on to our children. If we don't understand it, how are we supposed to pass this on and keep this chain of following Torah, following God? Especially because they're in a kind of exile, the first weird exile, not the first time, but they're in the land of Israel, the promised land, but they are also in exile under Roman occupation. And I think that when Jesus responds to them, he references a verse in Isaiah that talks about, your children will be taught by God. Isaiah starts that passage by saying, the barren woman will have more children than the woman who had a huge family. Basically just saying, when you are on God's side of things, when you are not just living in kingdom, but living in the kingdom, in the full realization of it, you will see that you may right now say, oh, I didn't have any kids genetically, biologically, therefore I don't have any kids. But when you can see things the way God sees them, you will see that you have way more children than you ever realize. And I think that like that's kind of how I feel about where God led me. Like I felt like I was taught something by God directly. And it took a whole year of my life, a year with way more stress and anxiety than was healthy for me. My parents were certainly very concerned about me during that time. But when on the other side, I got to say, like, hey, I've wrestled this thing out. I know who's my Savior and my Lord. I want to go get baptized again and rededicate myself to Jesus. Come on down to the river with me. Like that was a real moment that couldn't have been got to any other way. And so my biggest advice to you is to trust in that, to trust that the Spirit is already there, that God's presence is fully there, that this response, that this hurt that they're feeling is not, it's not inappropriate. Like, I mean, the very first story we have of humans feeling distraught is when they receive knowledge they weren't ready for, and it overwhelmed them. This is a place many people have been before, is what I'm trying to say to you, Renee. And it seems like you have a really strong sense of understanding for your daughters, which is beautiful. Honestly, I just encourage you and say you already have everything you need. You understand them. You're in a different place, which is good as a parent. For same as when they were babies, you needed to be able to reach the higher shelf, not because you're better than them or more, whatever, but because functionally the relationship you have, that's going to be really important for them to be able to navigate this. And it seems like you have compassion, understanding for the journey they're going on, and ultimately it's the Spirit that does this work. You can't be the one to necessarily score the touchdown pass. You're still on the team. You're still helping, just by being present there, just by looking at their situation clearly, being someone who can help them stay grounded. Because I mean, one of the things I will say from having been a little bit in that experience is that it's very disorienting, and just helping them stay grounded, whatever that looks like in your context. Like you know that situation better than I do, better than anyone other than the Spirit. So I would say, just as what's it in Acts, or no, I think Jesus says it. The Holy Spirit will tell you what to say when you need to say it. So truly, don't worry about it. Um, I think that I can't tell you that it'll be an easy process for them, or how it will end, but yeah, this is just a very difficult reality. One thing, though, that I will say broadly is that I think it is important that we still connect with church communities. So what I'm about to say is not in contrast or in opposition to that at all. What I will say is that in terms of spiritual community, especially with just all the changes and the very quick changes, very, very quickly occurring, rapidly evolving changes in our world, like relatively speaking, historically speaking, the church is going through a huge reckoning, growth period. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know genuinely, I don't know what the church will look like in 50 years or 100 years. I would be really surprised if it looked the same as it does today. And so because of that, keep your eyes open for, people that may not have tick the boxes of who you would expect to be your spiritual community, and maybe look for people who are just actually living and walking out something that reminds you of Jesus, something that maybe you can't even put that into words, something life-giving, right? What Jesus said earlier, and we don't just live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. Jesus in John 6, every the bread of God is everything that comes from heaven and gives life, or bread of heaven is everything that comes from God and gives life to the world. If you see something that you're like, this is giving life to the world, this seems Jesus-y, this seems like God, this feels more like kingdom, I don't think there is anything wrong with investing in that space, leaning into it as if it were akin to the sacred spiritual space of church, and to just start inviting the Holy Spirit into that relationship, into that space, into that group, whatever it is. Even if it's just like, part of a running club. Maybe, you don't have to turn it into a prayer group, but maybe you just, maybe you're someone who really connects with God through nature, and just invite the dudes in your jogging club to just have a moment to just breathe with you when you're out on a park trail. Just appreciate the nature. It doesn't have to be, evangelism mode. Make it sacred in the way that the Spirit leads you to. That is something I would encourage everyone to do, because I think that we can really miss out on the presence of God in places where we just aren't expecting it, and therefore don't take the time to look for it. And even if we do catch a glimpse of it, sometimes we're just like, oh, that's cool, and don't feel maybe the permission or the ability to treat it as if it is genuinely possible for that to be a sacred place of worship. But all it takes is people gathered together. It can be as simple as a meal, as Jesus showed us. And it can be as varied as every circumstance that God puts in front of you. So I kind of think about this as becoming a little bit more, I don't want to say omnivorous spiritually, but I kind of think of it like communion. It's like we're used to be like, okay, it's the juice and the bread. It's the juice and the bread. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, it is the juice, it is the bread, but I mean, it was originally wine. It was a Passover. There's a lot of ways we can slice and dice what communion is. Maybe this is something I will sometimes tell to my college students, like, if the presence of God is there, I don't think it matters if it's, Gatorade and Oreos. Like, is it more important that the food and drink is correct, or that the presence of God is there, that you are mindful of the actual presence of the body of Christ, and that's you, and that you can help someone else experience that, even if it's not happening under the auspices of a church institution. It doesn't have to be on brand. God doesn't have brands. God doesn't care about that. Anywho, man, that took us over time. All right.
I mean, it's good. It's a good question. Good thing to wrestle with. Good,
Oh yeah.
like we've probably all been through some level of that kind of experience, and it's not easy, but there's hope to get through it and come out into something beautiful on the other side. So, yeah, I love it. Well, just a reminder that our next Q&A is Monday, June 16th. I leave tomorrow morning for the Centralia prayer journey, so I'm going to see anyone who's going to be there for that. And I don't know. I might see you soon too, Josh. We'll see. Might have some plans cooking one way or the other, but we've got
How's my audio, by the way?
I don't know. I'm so congested right now, just violently sneezing all day. I got this new app that tells me what the pollen counts are going to be for the day, and I woke up this morning and it said it was going to be higher than yesterday, and boy, was that true. So man. I don't know what anything sounds or feels like today.
Oh, you poor thing, Brett. Well, that sounds like something that requires some rest.
Probably so. So we'll close it down for now, but thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this evening, Josh. And to the rest of you,
as always,
we'll talk to you again soon.